Hello and welcome to the Thursday edition of the State of Scottish Football here live on the excellent Estate of Mind network. My name is Struan Garvey and we are currently live streaming across YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, Twitch, LinkedIn, just anywhere you can get your media basically. We're all over the place, but thankfully I'm not alone today. I've got to my top left is Mr. David Smith. David, how are you doing today?
Good evening, very well, thanks, Struan, and I hope you're well as well.
I'm not bad myself. And to my top right, I don't think we've ever been on a show together before, Colin. So unfortunately, you're stuck with me for the first time. But Colin Watt, who's usually on a Friday, has joined us on a Thursday. How are you doing?
Hey, I fancied a wee change of atmosphere. I was getting kind of sick of Sean, so I thought I'll come in and join the boys on a Thursday. But I think we maybe done a Euro show before, but I'm looking forward to this one.
Definitely. We can all use a bit of time away from Sean. But we'll get straight on to the title because this news is literally broken within the past few minutes. And it's that Scotland are going to approve COVID vaccination passports in order to get into events of, is it 10,000? Yeah, just to double check with you.
10,000 and more, yeah.
10,000, yeah. So in the Premiership, that's 8 out of the 12 grounds. Just what are your initial thoughts on this, David?
I mean, if I'm being honest, I'm not really surprised by the decision, to be honest, because, I mean, Nicola Sturgeon's kind of been very clear and very proactive in her approach with regards to what she's wanting to do with regards to making a decision and obviously making this country a lot more safer. I mean, a lot of people need to understand that we are still in a global pandemic and yeah, we're nearing the end, but and is the end is the million question we're probably all asking ourselves right now, because, I mean, we're still seeing high COVID cases despite the fact that obviously people are getting double vaccinated. There's obviously the guys that aren't getting vaccinated, and we have to thoroughly respect that. They want to go down their route, and for those that don't want to get vaccinated, we thoroughly understand that. It's probably recommended that you do get your vaccination just because obviously it helps with hospitalisation numbers and various things like that. But I mean, it's always going to divide opinion. I mean, even Premiership managers are divided with regards to this. You've got Davy Martindale a couple of weeks ago saying everybody needs the vaccine. It's better for footballers. It's helping our players if they're double vaccinated. Whilst you've got Jim Goodwin this afternoon, and I'm pretty sure you guys will get onto it, that are going saying it's not for me. We've got to respect that. I mean, this is always going to be a debatable picture.
Topic. Yeah.
Topic. Thank you, Colin. Sorry, my face goes there. Thank you very much. Yeah, it's always going to be a debatable topic, and it's up to the public to see what they see fit. I mean, in terms of the general society, it's opened up again. It's normality compared to what it was like before it was in March 2020, and for many it is normality, and it's probably not the right decision for some people, but it's the right decision for others. So people have to just respect this decision, and here's hoping we get higher numbers going to the vaccination centres and getting themselves vaccinated for coronavirus.
I think the thing is, Struan, when you look at it, this isn't just going to affect the fans, the average fan, like any of us going to a football game. You've got to think that this is going to affect the players, the coaching staff, any of the sort of backroom team that would be involved. Because I'd imagine that if fans have to show that they're double vaccinated to get into the ground, then the players are going to have to show that they're double vaccinated to participate. I mean, we all saw what happened over in Brazil the other day when the Argentinian officials stormed the park. Can you imagine that scene at, say, Celtic or Ibrox when the SFA and Jason Leach runs onto the park to lift somebody up because they've not shown their vaccination passport? That they've got to set out the clear rules on this. I agree with David. I do think it's the right thing to do, but I mean, there's 3-4 weeks away before this is implemented. They've got to start laying out the ground rules and doing it very quickly.
I think it's the 1st of October, isn't it, that it comes fully into effect?
Yeah.
Now,
the big thing for me is, and Colin basically touched upon it just now, is the time frame of concern, because, I mean, there's going to be a lot of administration work for the clubs. There's going to be a lot of administration work for the governing body, and it's going to be very time consuming for everybody involved. I mean, I can understand the government's priority on this is safety, and I thoroughly agree with that. But the other side of this, I'm on the fence of the SFA when I mention this. It will be a fact of there's going to be a lot of administration, a lot of phoning fans, a lot of organisation involved, and it's probably a lot of organisation that these clubs don't need at this precise moment in time, and it's not just involving the fans either. Colin mentioned it. It's involving the players, it's involving the coaching staff, it's involving us as journalists even, because we need to probably have something probably by the 1st October to ensure that we can still go and cover games and cover games from football grounds rather than sitting in front of a laptop and covering games via a dodgy live stream. So there's lots of potential repercussions in here. There's lots of positives to validate the repercussions, but alongside that, there's also the in the middle that you need to get the balance right. And if I'm being honest, it's going to be a tricky job for everybody concerned to get that balance right.
It's interesting because I just want to bring this point up from Fazboy 1916, saying, so if you support Celtic, Rangers, Aberdeen, Hibs or Hearts, you need a vaccine to get in. Others don't. That's a quite conspicuous one, Struan, isn't it? Because you look at it and you go, well, for example, McDiarmid Park holds 11,000, but their average crowd's about 3 or 4. So where do you stand there? This is what I'm saying about the ground rules need to be put in and put in quickly so that people can get used to them. And they'll probably have to do some of these trials, because I remember when the likes of the kind of season card was brought in instead of the season book, you'd queues at the turnstile that's a mile long. Can you imagine that for a big game like Hibs, Hearts or Celtic, Rangers? People waiting 35 minutes to get in a ground just because they've got to show a passport. There's a lot of work that needs to be done in a short space of time.
Yeah, I think definitely. I think Fazboy makes a really good point there as well. The fact that certain stadiums in the country will have this into effect. It's definitely going to be interesting, as you say, the queuing aspect of it, just the outside of the stadium. Because once you get in and you're seated, you think that's it. But there's so much that goes into it beforehand that obviously a lot of people meet up outside the ground, and you see the crowds occasionally gathered outside different stadiums across the country. I mean, at the weekend, we've got the Edinburgh Derby coming up. We've already had the Old Firm. Can you imagine what happens when that comes into play after October 1st? When this comes, those will be the most populated games. I mean, it's still up for debate whether or not Celtic will actually let Rangers fans in coming up to the next Old Firm derby, and that could definitely have massive repercussions with the COVID passport. But one thing I did find interesting, David, you brought it up a couple of minutes ago, was that David Martindale has said he wants everybody to get vaccinated and he likes the idea. But Jim Goodwin, on the other hand, said he doesn't really. He's not the biggest fan of this. Do you think this is going to be a theme throughout the season in which we suddenly see managers or perhaps players speak out about it and potentially cause some disruption amongst both their fan base and also the players in the camp?
I think managers are already speaking about it, if I'm being honest, Stuart. I mean, I read a thing in the local paper up in Aberdeen last week with regards to Paul Hartley criticising the whole system just because he's had players missing for his own respective side. But I mean, you're going to have this has always had opinion since August, probably last year, when the Premiership commenced with no fans at the grounds, basically. And it's always going to cause one or two debates, and it's always going to be a hot topic amongst Scottish football ever since coronavirus started, and that's the big thing for me. It's just the fact that some these positive cases are still continuing at clubs, and you've seen the likes of Dunfermline coming out this week saying we'd have only had, if I'm not mistaken, 6 players if they played Elgin in the cup last week. You've also had Goodwin saying what he had to say, and from Jim Goodwin's point of view, he's got half a point, but also at the same time, St Mirren's never going to attract a big level of crowd unless it's one of the Old Firm playing. Neither will Livingston, for that matter. It's good that obviously Livingston are being proactive and obviously taking the vaccine development up, but for the majority of these clubs, apart from the clubs that were mentioned, which is probably the 2 Dundee clubs, Aberdeen, the 2 Edinburgh clubs, and Old Firm, nobody else is really affected by this. But for me, it's gonna cause a Royal Rumble, so to speak. Not a Royal Rumble in terms of WWF, but it'll cause a Royal Rumble just in the sense of there's going to be a lot of debate, there's going to be a lot of unhealthy conversations taking place, and to be honest, the Scottish game needs to be proactive. It needs to be vigilant now, and that's the big thing, because if they're not proactive or vigilant, it'll just end up being backs on the bum, so to speak, just with regards to getting it. If they get it wrong, it's capitulation after that.
I definitely wouldn't want to step into a Royal Rumble at the moment without knowing everybody was at least double vaccinated, to be perfectly honest. But Colin, I believe another point of the COVID passport is you no longer need to do a lateral flow test. Now, from my point of view, whenever I'm going to events at the moment, I'm always taking them. I believe people in high school and stuff like that as well, when they've sort of come back, people are taking them 2 or 3 times a week. Do you think that's potentially going to annoy people that they're not taking it? Do you think people will feel perhaps a bit less safe, the fact that the person beside you, they might be double vaccinated, but they haven't taken that lateral flow test?
It's an interesting one. I still think a lot of people will continue to take them because that is sort of the news that's coming out, and with the exception of who's actually doing the adverts at the minute, the general news and the general consensus is a lot of people are kind of following that, and they are getting the lateral flow tests. I know, having had to go and visit sort of elderly relatives in care homes, that's part of the procedure. You've got to go and take a lateral flow test before you can even get in. So things like that, I think people are kind of bringing it into normalization. Like, it's the same as you go to the shop, the first thing you do is make sure you've got your keys, your phone, your wallet, and your mask. It's the kind of 4 tick boxes that you do now. And when going to these events, it might become the normal thing that you've got your tickets, you've got your wallet, and then you've got your lateral flow that you may or may not have needed, but you take it anyway because you're erring on the caution of being safe. So the thing for me is, though, if you go to, say, Celtic Park or Ibrox, yeah, you're in 60,000 of a crowd, you're outdoors, you're sitting next to someone, but these players are also in that as well. And I think David Kelly brings up a good point here that says 25% of professional footballers in Scotland have been double vaccinated. Now, I don't know where David's got that stat, but I have heard similar figures before. If that is the case, and say, for example, St Mirren came to Celtic Park and Jim Goodwin refuses to do this COVID vaccine passport, does that mean he's not able to coach the side and his players don't get into the ground? There's so much ifs and buts and what ifs that we can't afford for this to kind of just be a case of, right, okay, we're going to go into a recess and we'll come back in 2 weeks' time and we'll review it again. Tomorrow we need to know what the ins and outs are, and the game needs to know the ins and outs so that they can lay down the proper precautions.
I think, sorry, Stuart, I think it's a big next couple of days for the joint response group, if I'm being honest. They've done brilliantly throughout this pandemic, and this is a big few days, a big probably week. If we're looking at it from a landscape point of view, this is probably a big week, just in the sense that they need to get the communication right to both the clubs, the fans, the media, and everybody involved in Scottish football.
Definitely. I think the 25%, I think I've seen something similar to that as well. I think that's very interesting, the fact, only a quarter of players have been double vaccinated at the point in time. And as you say, is Jim Goodwin, etc., not going to be allowed to get into certain games and the way it could work? It's definitely going to be something that I feel fans need to know about, because at the moment I feel we're getting bits of information and it's a little bit uncertain. As we've said, McDermott Park has a much higher capacity than it actually fills. What are the protocols going to be with that? Do the players get a say in this? We're always thinking, as Colin, you keep bringing up the players, and I think that's really important for this. The fact that, we're talking about how the fans might feel for this, but the players are going to be there as well. We've seen how many times, just not even in Scotland, just across Europe, how many times, down south in the Premier League, games have been called off or cancelled. Certain big players are missing because they've got COVID, and I feel definitely part and parcel with that. But I think before we move on from the COVID passport, I'm going to open up the floor here a little bit. Do either of you have any more points just to make on this in general?
I've got to say, I think I would rather this to a return to the idea of lockdowns. And if that is one of the things that happens, then that's great, because we're back at the football, we're getting the crowds back. We're going to talk about how Hampden sold out for the Israel game, and you see the crowd that was there for the game against Moldova the other night. It's good to get back to this sort of normality, as David was saying. And if this is the next stage in it, then I think reluctantly we're probably going to have to go along with it. But again, and I'm repeating myself over and over again, but we do need to see what it is, understand it more, and make sure that we're not in a position where October 1st comes around and we're cancelling games left, right and centre because we don't know what the protocols are. And I mean, we've got 3 weeks. If there's any footballers that are even not vaccinated or have only just recently received their first one, are they going to have enough time to get their second one in before this happens? I think it's 14 days after your second one before you can actually get the passport. There's a lot that's going on here, and I just think it's very, very quick, the turnaround time that we've got to do this.
It will be very interesting as well if a big game comes up after October and a player's missing, and it turns out they've only just had their second vaccine and the full efficacy hasn't kicked in at that point. And I think that's going to be we talk about players missing games from COVID. That's going to be a whole different kettle of fish for some major players missing out. It could definitely not change the landscape, but I think it's going to be one of the biggest things that we see, obviously, in Scottish football this season. David, you got anything else to add?
Well, the thing for me is, in terms of Premiership so far this season, and probably during the last 12 to 13 months, to be honest, we've hardly seen any positive cases in the Premiership. I know Aberdeen had a big one when they played Rangers on opening day of last season, and a couple of clubs have had issues here and there. St Johnstone notably just before the Scottish Cup final against Hibs. But with regards to the Scotland setup, I mean, that's twice Scotland have been caught out because of this COVID issue. It was before the Euros and before the Denmark game, if I'm not mistaken, last week. And then here's the thing: if only 24, I'm just giving you an example. If only 25% of the Scotland squad are vaccinated, does that mean the Scotland-Israel game, and Colin touched upon it similarly, does that mean the Scotland-Israel game in front of a sold-out Hampden Park now is under pressure to be potentially going off? It would have serious repercussions to the SFA if this game gets called off, and the SFA need to have a strong threshold in this, I feel.
I think that's absolutely spot on, to be honest. Yeah, it's definitely going to be interesting. I need to keep an eye on it. I'm going to read, once we finish here tonight, I'm going to read up on the articles as well and the news that's come out and just try and get my head around it as best as I can, to be honest, and hopefully know what's going to be happening, because we need a full Hampden for the Israel game. We definitely need that. But today, I don't think it's been made official yet, but it appears that David Hopkin is going to be departing Ayr United after a pretty...
It's official now, yeah.
Is it definitely official now?
Yeah, it's official, yeah.
Is it Duffy that's in charge temporarily at the moment then? Yeah?
He's temporarily in charge, yeah. So David Hopkin has left his role as the Ayr United manager after only 6 months in charge.
It's a bit interesting. That's, of course, the second one in Scotland this season following Brian Rice's departure. But, I mean, David, do you really think this was a surprise given the start to the season? 0 wins, 1 draw, 3 losses in the league. They've had 3 red cards as well, 1 being a straight and 2 double yellows. They've not really been up to the most. I'm sure Jack Donnelly, who is not here tonight, but I'm sure he's definitely got some strong views on this one. What do you make of this?
There's a reason he's not here tonight. He's celebrating apparently.
Before I answer the question, I did invite him on in my place just in case he did want to spark an opinion or spark a celebration on this show. But with regards to Hopkins, I'm not surprised by the decision, if I'm being honest. Just Hopkins' decision to resign, because, I mean, Ayr have had a poor start to the season, not helped by, obviously, the COVID case, the COVID outbreak, that happened in the last few weeks. And then the 2-0 defeat to Leith Rovers the other night there was probably just the last straw for both Ayr United Football Club and for David Hopkins. But, I mean, David started his reign at Ayr United very well. I mean, I covered Ayr United when they played Dundee back in March, and they were superb that night. I mean, you had Cammy Smith, who I might be wrong, I think it was the second last game before he departed to America. You also had Luke McCowan, who had a superb game that night. It was probably the reason why Dundee took him in. And you've seen a lot of positives coming from Ayr after that evening in question. And I was very impressed with Ayr. And I was saying to people after that game, I think Ayr will go and not challenge for promotion by any stretch of imagination, but Ayr will be a side that will be competitive. And then ever since that day in question, Ayr dwindled. And Ayr were very lucky not to get the ninth playoff place. And then recruitment-wise in the summer wasn't exactly positive. I mean, there was a few additions, but nothing household as such or blockbuster. And pre-season didn't exactly go well either. And then the season, it's just been a disaster from an Ayr United point of view. Ayr need to get the next appointment right, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, the guy David Smith, yes, namesake, he seems to be an ambitious chairman. He seemed ambitious when Mark Kerr left at Somerset Park. Going by interviews he did with his own media team at Ayr United, he seemed to be fairly ambitious about the project moving forward, but it can only be an ambitious project if you get the appointments right and you get the overall stuff off the park right. And one major factor in that is getting the management appointment right. And did he get the Hopkin appointment right? Probably not. Hopkin was probably a panic just to make sure Ayr were in no danger of getting relegated from the Championship. You're seeing names such as Jim Duffy and John Hughes getting linked in. I think Yogi would be a superb appointment for Ayr United. I mean, any club he's managed at in the past probably decade, it's been a Premiership club such as Cali and Ross County. He's obviously been linked to doing the Celtic B team in the past, if I'm not mistaken. So he'd be a superb appointment for a Championship club. And what Yogi's good at is he's good at getting a defensive stability about his side, but he's also good at getting forwards, scoring goals. And that's what he did with the likes of Jordan White and Ross County last season. But alongside that, when Yogi took over at County, he had a more defensive stability about him. And being honest, he would be a better acquisition for Ayr United than Hopkins would have been back in March.
Definitely. Now, I think what's interesting as well is when we first mentioned it, Colin, you said that he's only been in the job for 6 months. And although that seems like a short period of time, in the modern game, in such important jobs, is that really that short of a spell of time? I think this brings in a good debate of, are managers given enough time, or do the club have to take the player out? Pie and Broadville have luckily provided us with the different tenures of current managers in the Premier, all across Scotland, to be honest. And Jim McInally is the longest serving one at Peterhead, who's coming up to 10 years, I believe. 2011 he was appointed. And then the second longest one is Dick Campbell at Arbroath. Now, obviously Arbroath have made a really good start to the season. Do you think I've got another example of a manager who was given time, a bit more of a famous example, but do you think that Campbell is one to look at to say, if you do give them time, you can see what comes up, you can see the project working?
I think that Campbell's one's quite interesting because when you look at it, obviously he's the co-manager with his brother, as we saw in the Sky Sports interview last year, which was fantastic. If you haven't seen it, go and check it out after the show. And I think they're one of the ones that's sort of settled in the area. The same with Jim McInally as well. It's one of those ones where the ambitions are never to be a Premier League team. The ambitions are to competitive, to put on a good show on a Saturday afternoon and to bring in the crowds, to win games, to go the occasional cup run. But it's never to be that sort of team that's anywhere battling towards sort of promotion to the Premier League or even competing for a lot of the titles. So the pressure probably isn't the same for the likes of Jim McInally and Dick Campbell as opposed to David Hopkins when he came in the job. Now, Ayr United, for me, were always a team, if I was to kind of look at them over the last sort of 10, 15 years, I would expect them to be a championship team, because you look at Somerset Park, you look at the fans that they've got, and you look at the backing and the managers they've had over that time. I fully expect them to be a championship team. If they're playing League One or below, then they've had a couple of bad seasons. And when you look at the prize money that's out there, if they were to drop into League One this year, they would lose roughly about £100,000 in revenue. Now, that's the difference between being a full-time team and a part-time team in Scottish football. It might sound so insignificant. I mean, Celtic picked up Liam Scales for £500,000, so 5 times that. But yet, for teams like Ayr United, that's the difference between training Monday to Friday and then training every odd evening. So it is a good point that you make. Our manager's given enough time. He's had 20 games and he's won 5 of them. How long do you keep going? Because you keep that trend up at 25%, you will end up in that 9th position place that David was talking about. So you've either got to have a brave chairman who bites the bullet early and has someone who's ready to step in, or you kind of let it run. And I know you're going to give us an example of someone who's let it run over the last couple of years.
Definitely. Well, I think what was interesting as well is in Scotland, across the top 4 divisions, only 5 managers have been at their club for more than 4 years. I've just double checking my notes to make sure. And I think that's ridiculous when you think 42 teams and only 5 of them have been there for more than 4 years.
21 of them have been there less than a year. That's half the managers have been less than a year in their job in Scotland.
That makes the 6 months, doesn't look bad, does it? You got 6 months.
Exactly.
It's absolutely ridiculous. And out of those 5 teams there, not a single one of them is in the Premiership. The longest serving Premiership manager is Stephen Gerrard. Now, David, I think Gerrard's also an interesting one because he was the first manager, if I'm not mistaken, at Rangers, I think in the top flight, to go 2 seasons without ever winning a trophy of some description, or at least the first in a long period of time. But obviously Rangers stuck out with Stephen Gerrard and eventually they were able to reap the rewards. Rangers are obviously a much different kettle of fish to what Arbroath are, especially with Dick Campbell and other clubs that you can use throughout Scotland. Rangers are obviously demanding success. Do you think that's a really interesting one, that they gave Gerrard the time? Because prior to coming to Rangers, he was in the Liverpool Academy. He had absolutely no managerial expertise, experience, anything like that. They obviously backed him massively. He's had a lot of players come in and out of Rangers as well. Do you think that's the prime example to show, especially for the top clubs around the country, that if you stick with your manager and if you properly back him, just work time, the results may not come straight away, but after a while, they can be there?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, Rangers was that type of club that if you don't get it right within 1 or 2 seasons, as you touched upon there, Stu, you're normally biting the bullet and you're normally out the hot seat and out the door at the club. So I can understand, and full credit to Rangers for keeping a hold of Gerrard, because I mean, after the season where Celtic won 9 in a row, and there's obviously COVID and various things like that, but at the end, when you take the maths into consideration, there was probably, if I'm not mistaken, a 15-point difference by the time COVID started and between Celtic and Rangers, and you could have looked at that. 13 was it?
Yeah.
You could have looked at that and went and says, Stephen, not good enough. See you later. We'll bring in a more high-profile caliber manager, a manager that's done it in the game compared to a Steven Gerrard that's never won anything in the game, and a Steven Gerrard that had very little management experience. But fair play to Rangers. Despite COVID, they backed Gerrard. They brought in quality such as Hadji and other players, John McLaughlin. I know John McLaughlin's obviously not Rangers' number one, but John McLaughlin was terrific backup to Al McGregor. And the reason why I mentioned John McLaughlin is he probably helped Al McGregor get the best out of him, just because Al McGregor last season was tremendous for Rangers. It was probably one up there for player of the season, funnily enough, when you think about it. Because I mean, if it wasn't for Al McGregor, Rangers would have been wouldn't have been undefeated in league terms last season. So that was a big thing for Rangers last time. And yeah, Rangers haven't hit the heights of last season just yet, but I mean, Rangers have had a lot of European football and they're not exactly adapting to it very well. And I mean, Europa League's still decent for Rangers, but they missed out on that elusive Champions League, and that will have been disappointing from a Rangers point of view. But on to your original point, and it was massive credit to Rangers for keeping a hold of Stephen, because last season was a massive season for Rangers Football Club, and had they got that wrong, we'd have been all talking right now about Celtic 10 in a row, Celtic 10 in a row, Celtic 10 in a row, and it would have been still the talking point at Scottish football even at the middle of September. And another example of clubs backing managers was James McPake last season at Dundee. Dundee were under intense pressure. They were getting defeats off of Ayr, Queen of South, John Morton. 3 sides that are, I put Queen of South out of the equation here, 2 sides that are probably struggling near the bottom of the Championship. And then Dundee picked up some momentum and got that playoff final victory over Kilmarnock, and also had a tremendous performance in the semi-final against Raith Rovers, and Dundee in the Premiership. James McPake was under enormous pressure, but John Nelms and Tim Keys at Dundee kept the hold of McPake, and obviously James McPake got Dundee into the Premiership. And there's also times where owners or chairman will give managers time, such as Lennon at Celtic last season. Lennon perhaps could have been at Celtic long before he was, but Celtic gave Lennon a chance to go and turn things around, because Lennon already built a wee bit of a legacy that's to an extent been ruined slightly, but also Celtic looked at this as a bigger picture and went, Neil, this season's not going well, but we'll give you an opportunity. And looking at it, if you take the Hibs and Bolton things out of the equation from Neil Lennon's point of view, you've probably at Celtic for just under a decade, and that's a big thing. I mean, you don't really get that opportunities at big clubs such as Rangers and Celtic, but fair credit to both of them, because they kept the hold of these managers for a sustained period of time rather than press the panic button.
It's an interesting point that you make there on kind of giving the managers the time to build a legacy or a dynasty. And David Kelly comes in and shows that when we just mentioned 21 managers have been there less than a year, does that stat show that changing managers works? And that's kind of the other side of the argument, Struan, isn't it?
Yeah, I think definitely. I mean, I think one of the prime examples, just looking at European football, was last season. When you look at someone like Chelsea, who spent a lot of money under Frank Lampard and then sacked him because the results weren't going well. In comes Thomas Tuchel and they go and win the Champions League. And very often you see that with clubs. The managerial bounce can be absolutely massive, the way a team can just respond and react to a new manager. And very often, 2 or 3 years later, they go away again. I think the average term of a manager across, just the UK in general is around 2.5 years now or something like that. It's absolutely ridiculous when you think about it. I go back to Alex Ferguson, who the most successful manager, one of the best managers we've ever seen, to be honest. He didn't win the Premier League at Man United for about 7 years. He came in '86. They didn't win the Premier League until the 1992-3 season. Can you imagine if he'd been sacked, 2 or 3 years into the job? I think his first cup was the FA Cup back in 1990. So even then, it took him 4 years just to get that. Can you imagine if Alex Ferguson had been sacked? I mean, obviously he'd done wonders with Aberdeen as well. So he did have previous history with other clubs, and I feel sometimes that's what keeps a manager in a job. More of the experience talking rather than a new manager coming in, is the fact that things aren't going well now, but they've done this in the past, what they've done. And I think James McVeigh's a really interesting example, because as David, you said, a year ago could have been gone. Dundee weren't doing the greatest. Obviously, he's not an experienced manager at all by any stretch of the imagination, but technically, after Steven Gerrard, he's the longest serving manager of any team in the Premiership. And I say technically because they've only just been promoted to the Premiership. But at the same time, he's been there. Even he has only been at the club for a very short period of time. I think Jack Ross was quite high on the list of time spent at a club. And from my point of view as a Hibs fan, I still feel like Jack Ross has only just come in the door, to be perfectly honest. I don't think it's been that long at all. And yet he's one of the longest serving managers. It's a shame, but it feels in modern football, it's difficult to give managers time, because you have to imagine, if that other guy can come in, can he do a much better job than us? Can he get more out of this group of players? And as we said, 6 months, that's potentially all a manager gets. I was in a press conference with Jack Ross a few months ago, and he made the point that 2 or 3 months, talking about the transfer of Chris Muller, 6 months in a managerial's career, it's massive. To us as fans, we'll get the player come in 6 months, and we'll sign this person here and then. But that space of time for a manager at a club who are demanding success, we talk about a Rangers, a Celtic, if the success isn't coming in that time, you're not giving anything else like that at all back.
No, I take a look at it and I think back to Celtic signing Moussa Dembele. Now, everybody says that was Brendan Rodgers' first signing. He was actually signed by Ronnie Deila. He was signed by Deila back in the sort of March, April time, just before it announced that Deila was going to be moving on. So you've got these kind of players that are coming in, even the likes of Chris Ayr. Chris Ayr kind of grew as a player under Brendan Rodgers, but he was a Ronnie Deila signing. So there's guys that, Jack Ross could go on a horrible run of form, and then this guy's coming in January and he's coming into a brand new manager. So it's an interesting point when you look at it like that. There's not many others that I can think of that have signed players that they didn't actually get the chance to manage because they get sacked before it. But it's like one of those sort of football manager things where you bring a couple of players in and they're coming in pre-contracts, and the next minute you're out the door yourself. So the time of managers in football, you said the average now is just over 2.5 years. So I think of when I was growing up, Alex Ferguson, as you mentioned, Arsene Wenger at Arsenal, and the legacy that he left behind there, to the point of Arsenal's never really been the same team ever since. But even when you go kind of lower down the leagues in England, there's managers that have been there for a long time, like Darren Ferguson. I know he's obviously following in his dad's footsteps, not to the same extent, but he was at Peterborough on and off. It was the same with Nigel Clough as well. He's been on and off at a couple of clubs and probably spent 5 to 10 years at each of them. You just don't get it nowadays. That's modern football. And it's all about demanding success. Even at the lower levels, there's certain clubs, as I mentioned earlier on, like your Peterheads and your Arbroaths, that you can get away with that at. But every other club has an ambition to be bigger than what it is. And if they don't get there, the first thing that seems to go out the door is the manager.
Definitely. David, from a player's point of view, quite a lot of people talk about a managerial pool, and often when a player's, getting their first interview for the club, they say, I came to Celtic to play for Postecoglou, I came to Rangers to work under Gerrard. Do you think the players don't always think that? Because obviously you're most likely going to outstay a manager. If you're signed on a 6-year contract, if you're a big money signing, and if you're, a 26, 27-year-old, you're sort of in the prime of your career and you come to a big club, you're expecting to be at that club for the majority of your contract. You're not coming to a club as a stepping stone, no offense to any clubs like that. It's a future prospect for the player. Do you think that a player doesn't actually always have faith in their manager? Do you think they're coming more for the club?
I would agree with that, if I'm being honest. I mean, a lot of players kind of will go to the press and go and praise the manager just to kind of cheese off the press a little bit and kind of make sure that the press are writing down the stories that they've got a really good relationship with managers and various things, because the last thing you want in the media is a player falling at the manager or player potentially not getting on with the manager, because if the press get a hold of these type of stories, they're on like a flash. It's as simple as that, and that's the thing. I mean, that is really is the case. I mean, you'll find situations where players won't get on with managers, and I know Aberdeen have put out a photo this afternoon that Lewis Ferguson high-fiving Stephen Glass, but there was also various reports that Lewis Ferguson was falling out with Stephen Glass. It appears to be, based on social media images, that's far from the truth. But these situations can occur. I mean, the Premiership clubs, beg your pardon, are probably very quick to hide any potential repercussions or any potential animosity or friction between player and manager, just on the basis of if this news gets out, fan base on it, media's on it, and it's what's happening with this manager, what's happening with that manager, why is the player falling out with the manager? Get that player out the door. These kind of things would just materialise had that been the case.
Do you know, it's interesting you mentioned that about trying to put this PR campaign on for like the press and stuff like that. The biggest show against that, and I know it's not Scottish football related, but when you think back to when Leicester won the Premier League and how quickly the players turned on the manager the following season and actually got him sacked.
So he didn't even get a second, did he?
No. It's incredible the influence that players have on that now. So you just wonder how many of these players have got the ear of the chairman to say it's not working, we need to change it up. And who actually holds the power of influence there? Is it the manager or is it the players?
I recall back to
a Scottish football example of that. What Colin just said there was Aberdeen last season. Derek McInnes worked wonders at Aberdeen. Yeah, last season there was various stories coming out that Derek McInnes had lost the changing room at Aberdeen. Yet players were going to the media and basically saying, we love Derek McInnes, we like working under Derek McInnes, we've got a good relationship with Derek McInnes. Yet from the outside looking in, it sounded as although Derek McInnes had lost the changing room.
I always think, in recent times, I think he's probably the most publicised manager for falling out with players. I think of Jose Mourinho, how many times he falls out with certain dressing rooms. And I remember a video of, I think it was back in 2017, 2018, where Jose was taking training and he says something to Pogba. And Pogba turns around and he looks really confused and angry at something. And there was always reports that those two had fallen out. Luke Shaw was another one. And, you think about Tottenham Hotspur as well and the sort of relationships, how certain players can be frozen out. I think quite a lot of players will just think, I'm going to be here longer than you. I'm happy enough with the situation I'm in. And as you say, some of them may, have connection to the board. When you think about how long certain players are associated with a football club, if you're the club captain, you've been there for over a decade, very often, I think you're going to have a big say in what the club do moving forward. I think Lionel Messi, for example, had a massive say in certain things that Barcelona did. Obviously, club captain for so many years there. I think he had a big input on the way things worked, but it's definitely a difficult one. I personally, I find it difficult, the overall argument that, managers should be sacked if they're not doing well enough, because I do like to see managers get given time. I think it's always a shame when it's a heavy defeat for a manager who's under pressure and instantly you're thinking, looking at the bookies, who's the odds on to get the next job, who's coming in, he'd do well with this squad, he'd do there. And then sometimes you say, there's not enough managers currently available in the market, who would come in that's better. I think it's always difficult, but as the stats unfortunately show, sometimes sacking a manager can be the most effective thing, and it may well work for Ayr United. But one manager who I don't think he's going to be sacked anytime soon, he's recently signed a new contract until 2024, is on the international stage, because it's a whole different kettle of fish, an international manager. And we've had a pretty good international break, I would say, overall from a Scottish point of view. We may as well briefly touch on this now with reports of players returning back to their clubs now. Obviously, we lost 2-0 to Denmark. I think you would accept a 2-0 defeat to Denmark. We then beat Moldova 1-0. And a fantastic 1-0 result against Austria. And it's the Austria result I want to focus on in terms of the managerial sacking question, because although we beat Moldova, you could hear boos at Hampden. You could hear a team getting booed off. It was a mix. I would say there was obviously a lot of cheers. A lot of people spoke about how great the atmosphere was, but to be winning a game and still be booed off, it's not great at all. Colin, how big do you think that win was for Steve Clarke? I mean, obviously, I don't think he would have been sacked had we lost to Austria or drawn to Austria, but for his own confidence, and I feel just the general consensus around the team.
Yeah, I was listening to one of the phone-ins the day of the game, and someone said that they phoned in and said, "We don't need to beat Austria, but I wish we did," because it's in them performances where Steve Clarke manages to put something into the team that transforms them. You look at the Serbia game, yes, okay, we conceded late on, but the will was there to go on and win the game in penalties. The Israel game as well, they just seem to up their level when they need to do it, with the Euros probably being the exception there. But even when you look at that, the England game, how many players upped their performances for that? So we've been due a scalp. And I would say beating Austria is a scalp for Scotland. When you look at it, Austria obviously qualified for the last 16 of the Euros. Scotland couldn't get out their group. And to go over there, when you look at Austria's record at home, especially, they haven't lost that many games over the last couple of years. So for Scotland to do that is massive. And we've got 3 big games coming up next. At home to Israel, away to the Faroes, and then away to Moldova. If we can get 9 points out of 9, we're actually talking about being in a playoff that many people had written off straight after the Denmark game.
I think definitely. One thing that, for me, I saw during the Austria game is that although some fans may not be fully behind Steve Clarke, the players are. And David, how much do you think that was a sign that these players are fully behind Steve Clarke and just, given 110% in that game? Because obviously, as Colin said, Austria, a really good side. They took Italy to extra time during the Euros. They're not the best at the moment without Sabitzer, obviously one of the better players, but they were still a top side. To go away and get a victory in the manner that we did, how important do you think that was?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's no question that there's a togetherness in the Scotland camp at this precise minute in time. And for me, the likes of Jack Hendry and Grant Hanley in particular get justifiable, but spells that out with unjustifiable criticism. But under Clarke, they seem to have, especially over the last few games, they seem to have done very well for themselves defensively. But also, Stephen O'Donnell gets a lot of justifiable criticism, and understandably so.
Stevie Clarke's love child.
Exactly, yes. But what you'll get from Stephen O'Donnell is he defends, right? He does nothing else, right? I've said this on this show. He does nothing else but defend, right? What Stephen O'Donnell will do is he's not a ball-winning defender. He's not a ball-playing defender. He's not a long ball-playing defender. But what you'll get from Stephen O'Donnell is he'll defend, right? And he did that at Wembley. He defended for 90 minutes and got man in the match. And you've also seen a difference from likes of John McGinn, Billy Gilmore, Lyndon Dykes, Shea Adams. Shea Adams and Lyndon Dykes are not exactly renowned goal scorers. But what you'll get from the 2 players in question is an ability to go and work hard, despite the fact that Dykes was a little bit anonymous last weekend against Moldova. The Moldova performance could have been better, and that's why fans were booing the players off the park. Had that Austria game been at Hampden, we'd have all been on social media, we'd have all been in the pub having a pint after the game going, what a great performance that was from Scotland. Yet because it's Moldova, and if I'm not mistaken, are the 4th worst country either in Europe or in the world.
I think they're 175th, their ranking is.
Yeah.
We're looking at that and going, what a poor performance that is. We're not qualified for Qatar. That is a poor performance. Yet 3 days later, we're proving the doubters wrong. Through a wee tweak in the system, which worked massively. And it showed Tuesday night that we're all together as a nation. There is critics, understandably so, but as a team, we're together.
Definitely. You picked up on a few players there in Grant Hanley and Jack Hendry, who a lot of people were saying had their best games in a Scotland shirt. Another one was Callum McGregor, who we touched on. Colin, we're definitely sticking with the back 3-5. I don't think there's any question about that under Clarke. Do you think our back 3 is now, that should be the solid one? Hendry on the right, Hanley in the middle, and Tierney on the left. Do you think that should be the one that we go to? Because obviously Scott McTominay wasn't part of this test. He was away for surgery, and we've seen him sort of play as the right-sided centre-back, but a lot of fans would rather him be pushed up into the midfield because that's his natural position. He plays there for his club. And I think the left wing back as well, obviously, we know that's going to be Robertson. And the right wing back is sort of the only role that's still up for debate. I think it could be one of those where up against a good opposition, it'll be Stephen O'Donnell. David, you make a great point about he's just a defender. He does that. He saw at Wembley, saw against Austria. A lot of people were doubting his ability. He came in, he did what it says on the tin, really. He was a defender who defended. But against a team who are perhaps going to sit back, play a bit of a low block, that's where you could see somebody like Nathan Patterson come in, or perhaps another one of the options who are tipped, likes of Ralston, Ramsey, Rooney. But do you think that 3 is sort of cemented now for Scotland?
I do, and I think it's going to be a big loss that Hanley misses out in the Israel game. So whoever comes in there has to do a similar type role, because they all have their jobs there. When you look at it, Tierney's, it's clearing the ball, it's heading the ball, and it's getting up and down the park. Hanley is that sort of sweeper who comes in and clears up all the mistakes that's been made by anybody in front of him. The amount of times where balls were given away and Grant Hanley's the last man to come back and actually win that ball back. So you're looking at who's actually going to step in there to do that role. Would it be McKenna coming in to do that? I'm not 100% certain. As you say, Hendry's there as the ball-playing defender. You look at his goal against the Netherlands and that says what he's there. The other question, and someone coming in here on the comments just about steals my thunder, Cole P saying Liam Cooper, surely. I think Cooper's a good option. I think he's very similar to Grant Hanley and he's got that experience of playing in the Premier League as well. So it's getting that right, because we're not going to have it all our own way against Israel. They are going to come out and have a go at us. They put 5 past Austria. So they're high on confidence at the minute as well, despite getting scudded off Denmark. But getting that back 3 right is going to be massively important. At right back as well, I thought Nathan Patterson had a good game against Moldova. I don't think the team overall had a great game, but I thought he was pretty good. As David says, O'Donnell, he is best at defending and defending only, as he's proved in front of goal the other night as well. That's not something that's in his forte. Ralston's had a great start to the season. It'll be interesting to see if he can keep that form up, or whether Juranovic will come in and take his jersey off him, and then if that's the case, he'll probably not even be in consideration for the next squads. It's all about keeping that momentum going, getting the guys in that are playing. And by the way, what a future Billy Gilmour will have. He is an absolute star. I say this jokingly and not jokingly, that boy could win a Ballon d'Or one day.
I was just going to touch on Billy Gilmour next. He has been absolutely phenomenal. We've seen, he's sort of struggled to break into that Chelsea team, but when he has, we've seen him win man of the match in just about every competition, I think, on his debut. And he's come into that team, and I feel similarly to the defence, our midfield is shuffled around quite a lot. I think last year, John McGinn is possibly the only one who you would say he's got to start. The rest of the options can rotate, and we see who we have. For me, Billy Gilmour is now one of the first names on the team sheet. He's only 20 years old, but he can just completely dictate the play. And it's the passes that he makes look simple. It's difficult passes that he plays in the midfield, and they just look easy to him. It's ones where he can break the line, and it just allows somebody like John McGinn to say, yeah, I'm just going to move forward here. You can understand the play. And I feel the fact that he's taken corners now as well, this is quite a small thing, but to me, it's massive. The fact that Billy Gilmour is now taking the in-swingers on the right-hand side. I think that's absolutely massive. He's got a great pass on him. David, do you think he is going to be that nucleus in the team? I spoke previously on a show last week that we're getting a real spine coming along here, and to me that's one of the most important things, that we can't keep chopping and changing it. Do you think Gilmour is key to that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, the thing on Billy Gilmour's point of view is I don't think us as Scotland supporters have put him under any pressure. I mean, there's been times in the past where we've had a Kieran Tierney.
I don't know about that, David. I just said he might win a Ballon d'Or one day. That's quite a lot of pressure.
Well, that's from a minority of one Colin. We've had the likes of Kieran Tierney coming to the Scotland side in recent years. Well, I mean 4 or 5 years now. And we put a lot of pressure on Tierney and Robertson when they came into the Scotland setup. With Billy Gilmour, he was thrown into the deep end, and we didn't really put the lad under any pressure. It was basically a case of you're in the team, show what you're about kind of thing. And the first few games were showing what kind of player Billy Gilmour is all about. And after that, he's just performed from strength to strength. And sometimes, both in a club and an international sense, you need a player that's got a lot of momentum. And with Billy Gilmour, he's found that for both club and country. I mean, he's playing for an average at best Norwich City side, and he's performing wonders there. He's playing for a Scotland side that have a bit of quality about them, and he's filled the quality players in the sense of Ryan Christie, Conor McGregor, John McGinn, also he's got Lyndon Dykes and Shea Adams who can do a power of work. And he's also got a good nucleus about him. But Billy Gilmore, back to your original point, will be a main player to come and will be the nucleus for Scotland. And Scotland will probably play a system around him. It will not be around other players within the team. It will be around Gilmore himself. And if Scotland can get this whole system right, they'll do wonders. And Billy Gilmore's at a great age because he's at 20 years old and he could probably play international football for the next decade. And with the next decade and the fact that the people and players will break into systems and break into countries, he's at a great age just in the sense that he'll have experience in 5-6 years' time, which he can field and on to the more younger players. He will get it in an under 21 sense. And Gilmore has went through the SFA Performance Academy thing.
Mm-hmm.
They've also had from the under 21s Calvin Ramsey. There was somebody else that I've completely forgotten about. But we're noticing players now coming from the Performance Academy into the national team, whether it's senior or indeed under 21s. And these players in question, such as your Ramseys and your Gilmores, are coming into your club and country and not looking out of place and do very well for themselves, and they don't look exposed whenever they take to the field, both for club or for country.
Definitely. The future is bright for Scotland. It sounds great to say. We've got a great group of players currently. The under-21s team, when I saw the team sheet was just came out on Twitter, I thought it looked incredibly strong and it's looking great. We've not got too much time to touch on the Scotland game, so I would tune into yesterday's show, which had Grant, Sean and Jack going in more detail into the Austria game. But I'm gonna pass it over to Colin now, who attended the Celtic press conference for the Glasgow City and Celtic Glasgow derby at the weekend ahead of the SWPL, one of the biggest games that you'll see all season in the second game week.
Yeah, and I mean, it's probably one of the few times where you won't have anybody complaining that you're calling this a Glasgow derby. But it's between two of the biggest teams in the Women's Premier League. We had the chance to speak to Fran Alonso earlier. He was speaking about the fact that it seems to be that more and more often these games come up earlier in the season. And when you look at it, it's the only team that he has failed to defeat. Now, he'll say he has defeated them, but obviously that game was kind of ruled out because the season was declared null and void. But this is what he had to say about facing Glasgow City very early on in the season.
Looking ahead this Glasgow City game, it's a huge one on Sunday. How are you feeling about meeting them so early in the season? It's good that it's not maybe the first fixture, but you do keep getting these Glasgow City fixtures earlier rather than having had a few games under your belt, although you've had more of a pre-season. How's that?
Yeah, I mean, if you could choose, we have to play them anyway 3 times. If we could choose, I would rather play them a little bit later, but it's early on the season, but it's early for both teams. So it's the same advantage or disadvantage for both teams. So we just will get on with it. And, you know, I feel confident. I feel I like how the team is training. And we will go to the game, you know, like always, trying to get something from the game, but knowing that they are the champions and, you know, the favorites. But we never minded that in the past, and we don't do now either.
It's interesting that Fran says that he thinks that Glasgow City are the favourites going into this. Dave, you've watched a lot of the SWPL over the last kind of couple of years. Celtic faced Aberdeen in the opening day of the season with a 4-2 victory, but Glasgow City have been the dominant side in Scottish women's football for the last 14-15 years. So I think that's right in saying that he still feels that City are the favourites despite the kind of leaps that Celtic have made over the last 18 months.
I still think they are. I mean, they are a club in transition, but they're not exactly a big transition. And they still have the quality, such as Priscilla Chinchilla, Odi Fuutidu, who should have scored yesterday against Servette in the Champions League. They've also got Van Wyk. She's re-signed. I mean, there was a lot of talk with regards to whether she was continuing at Glasgow City or not. Alexander, she's signed a 4-year deal. So Glasgow City are definitely showing intent to try and win 15 in a row here. And for me, Grant Scott missed a big opportunity for me yesterday, just in the sense that if he got Champions League football for Glasgow City, he'd have probably been the permanent manager. But I think Glasgow City will go down a different route, and probably now is probably the stepping stones to what's next to come for Glasgow City, because I feel Glasgow City will go down a different route. And if they keep a hold of Grant Scott, fair play to Glasgow City, because I mean Grant Scott is a great coach, but I do feel that he's missed a big opportunity with what happened in the Champions League yesterday. For Celtic, I watched them against Aberdeen, obviously, and I still feel there's more to come from Celtic, because Celtic, I thought, were the more dominant side against Aberdeen on Sunday, but they missed a lot of great opportunities. And Wellens had chances, Atkinson had chances, Izzy Atkinson, of course, Tegan Bowie had chances, and had they took those chances, there'd have been 6 or 7 for Celtic, and that's not me trying to hype up Fran Alonso's side here. I'm being brutally honest by saying that although Aberdeen looked fairly organised at the back of the second half, there was also instances in that game on Sunday where Celtic were on the front foot and posing an intent, and the Celtic were really unlucky not to be up a couple of goals before they scored. And they are a really good side moving forward. And for Fran Alonso's side, they will go under the radar, I still feel, this season, because they've not exactly signed big names. Tyler Tolan's a big signing, but they've lost Lisa Robertson and Sarah Ewens, who were 2 big players for me last season. But Glasgow City have a quote talented squad, and this is a big game to see if they respond from yesterday. And if they can go and respond, it's a show their mentality. But also, last Sunday was a big victory for Celtic, just in the sense of they faced Glasgow City both at the start of last season and the first game after lockdown when the season resumed again, and they came away with both occasions with a defeat. Whilst they got that victory over Aberdeen, momentum's a big thing in football, and this is a big game for both clubs. Leagues aren't won in the second week of the season, but this is a big game for both clubs on Sunday afternoon.
It's interesting you say that, because the next clip we will bring up is about the title itself and what Fran's views are on it. But Struan, when you look at it, if Glasgow City had won that game yesterday against Servette, they would have got £340,000. Now, to compare that to the men's game, you'd have to finish third in the championship to get that sort of prize money. That just shows you how big that could have been for the women's game.
Yeah, absolutely massive, to be honest. I was gutted to see the results going in yesterday, especially after they went 2-1 ahead on aggregate. It's an absolutely massive defeat, to be honest. And I wonder if that's going to play a part coming into this game at the weekend. Obviously, Glasgow City are outright the favourites for the league title, and they should be. Absolutely terrific squad. But the fact that they've now been knocked out of Europe, coming up against Celtic, fresh off a good victory over Aberdeen at the weekend as well, I wonder if that's going to be playing in the back of their minds. I wonder if it's going to be in Grant Scott's thinking. I remember a few weeks ago, they'd won a game. I think it was 3-0. They'd won the game. And Grant Scott spoke after it saying that he was, he's happy with the victory, but he wasn't really happy with the performance. And I wonder if that's going to be sticking with him again, is the fact that although, they may have played well, they've been knocked out of Europe already at this stage.
Yeah, and it was interesting to see what Fran's thoughts were on that. And he mentions that he has got the better of Glasgow City once before. It just didn't count.
Yeah, you put up a couple of good fights last season against them, but never quite got the 3 points. Have you taken lessons from what you learned from last season? Are you going into this fixture feeling a little bit more confident in terms of your understanding of what this fixture is and means?
Yeah, I mean, we did get the 3 points, just later didn't count, but we did get one of the 3 points.
Yeah.
But no, it's the only team that beat us last year. So, obviously, I am preparing the game extra carefully in terms of tactically with the coaches on our own to make sure we don't make this adjustment, because they are a very good team and very experienced team. So, yeah, I feel confident that we will play a good game, and hopefully we can get something from the game, as I say. But they are good, and the fact that they lost yesterday, I think they are going to bring even extra fight on them, because obviously they have to try to come back to winning ways. It's a team that don't lose often. So when they do, they need to make sure that they don't do 2 in a row. So we know they are going to be extra motivated, and so are we.
It's interesting that I had the chance to also speak to Celtic's new signing, Charlie Wellings, who came in from Bristol City. And she said that in one Zoom conference with Fran Alonso, she was sold on the move. And Struan, I think what Celtic fans have really got the kind of backing of him is he just comes across as a genuine nice guy, and his tactics come across really well. And you can't help but fall in love with the way that he approaches the game. That it's just a pure, honest love of football.
Yeah, definitely. And I feel from a neutral point of view, if you don't have any affiliation with the team, somebody like that can just draw you into a club, somebody who just loves the game. And I'm a big fan of Fran Alonso, even as you mentioned there, the fact that he's bringing up the result that they won, but it did technically count. I love that. I love that in a manager who can have a joke, but also make quite a serious point that, we did have a victory over them. And I feel he's definitely one of the attractions to coming to Celtic at the moment is what he's doing. As he said, he's doing an excellent job at the moment, and we've spoken at length about managers earlier on, and I feel he's definitely a character who you'd come to play for Fran Alonso.
Yeah, you can't help but kind of be happy every time he speaks, Dave. He's just one of those guys that you would buy him a pint and talk about football for hours and hours.
I enjoyed interviewing him on Sunday, Colin. I mean, I got the pleasure of interviewing him after the game on Sunday. I don't want to be self-conscious when I say that, but I absolutely enjoyed listening to him on Sunday. We could have spoke for hours and hours about our beautiful game, and yeah, he's a very intelligent guy, Fran Alonso. If there's something wrong, he'll be the one to fix it. He's got a very innovative approach about him, and that's the big thing from Fran Alonso's point of view. He's got a process, and his process ultimately will be to win the SWPL 1. But for me, he still has a bit of a building to do. But last season was sustainable from a Celtic point of view. Now they need to go and kick on from that, and Sunday will go a long way to kicking on from last season.
Yeah, and one of the key points that I take away from that, and it was well represented by all of the fan media groups who were there. I have to say, everyone who was there put in some really interesting questions. But one of the outcomes was that he mentioned that Celtic are now training full time. And they are one of 3 teams in the league who are now training full-time: Glasgow City, Rangers and Celtic. And he says that basically now they come in every day, they have breakfast at Celtic Park, they make their way down to Barrafield to do their training, and then they come back. But they're now playing in Airdrie's Penny Car Stadium. They want to be playing at Celtic Park, Struan. You can understand, they just want to experience the same feeling as the men's team does.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's absolutely fantastic as well for the women's game that we have three of the biggest clubs now supporting the women's team and going full time. I think it's absolutely excellent, and I feel it'll be good for the game as well to see, you know, the Old Firm come into it. I know a lot of people will complain and say that the Old Firm it's just going to be boring and they're just going to dominate. But I think it's absolutely excellent, and I really do hope that we get to see games at Ibrox. We get to see games at Celtic Park. You know, I remember down south, I think it was the start of last season, or perhaps this is before. Man United's women team played at Old Trafford, and I believe there was another one at the Etihad, and it's absolutely fantastic. And I feel these opportunities should be given more. I remember the first Hibs women game I attended was against Slavia Praha in the Women's Champions League, and that was Easter Road, and it was absolutely excellent. And later on that season, in the cup final between City and Hibs, that was at Tiny, and it's just great to be in these big stadiums, and I hope throughout the season we get to see more of that.
Well, it's interesting. Fran's just about to tell us what he thinks on the rest of the league, but before we get there, because we'll close off on that clip, let's get a prediction for this, because it's the big game in the SWPL. Dave, I'll go with your expertise first. How do you see this one going?
After seeing Celtic myself on Sunday, beg your pardon, having seen Glasgow City yesterday, I'm going to go for a score draw on this. I'm going to go 1-1.
1-1. How do you think this one will go, Struan?
I'm leaning 2-1 towards Glasgow City.
2-1. Well, we're going to get Fran's views on whether he thinks this is a title decider, and then I'll bring it back for Struan to wrap us up. You mentioned earlier that Glasgow City were the only team that you lost to last season. Now, games like that obviously can determine the destination of where the title ends up. With this only being the second game into the season, is that something that's already playing on the mind? Is that something you try and install within the mindset of the girls, that if you win this game, it gives you that edge as you go towards trying to win the title this season?
I don't want to put this pressure on the girls, because we shouldn't be thinking about winning the title. We should be thinking about winning the 3 points. As you say, you know, I've been here 2 years, and Glasgow City is the only team in Scotland that has beat us, and that hurt. And when we beat them, it didn't count, and that hurt. So for me, you know, personally, it's a game that I really, really want to win. I really would love to win that game, but I know they are the champions for a reason. They have been the best team in the country for 14 years. And there is nothing new this season. They are still outstanding team. In terms of how the game on Sunday is going to affect the league, I think it's almost irrelevant. It's almost irrelevant because we have to play them 2 more times, and second, because Rangers are very strong this year, Hibs are very strong this year, Aberdeen are a team that is going to cost points to some of us. The same with the Spartans. You know, it's a much stronger league than was last season. So yeah, in terms of the league, I don't think it's any. But in terms of us and our belief and you know, obviously the 3 points is what matter the most. So we really want to have them.
And do you know what? I'm going to back them. I fancy Celtic to get this. I'm going to go with a 2-1 Celtic victory.
I think it makes me as well about how much stronger the league is this season, and I would encourage as many people as I can here to just watch the SWPL this season. I think it's going to be a really competitive year, but I'm afraid that's all we have got time for tonight on the Thursday edition. Had a variety of topics that we ended up covering tonight, and I've really enjoyed it. So I'd like to thank Colin and David for joining me tonight, and we'll be back again tomorrow as usual at 6 o'clock, so we'll be sure to tune in then. But thanks for now.